there's this planetary consciousness, this idea that the planet is also speaking. It's not speaking to us as if we're outside of it. In many senses, it's speaking with itself, right? Because we are not on the planet, we are the planet in its ongoing complexity. So the planet is disseminating these monstrous tensions, and they arrive to us as violent disruptions of the normative, or the normal, or the familiar. And then we point our fingers at them and say, that's violent, right? We know in our stories the monster as the harbinger of violence. I want to disrupt that and think instead that monsters, or the monstrous here, the monster is the thing that shows up and introduces us to the violence we're already in, right? It doesn't come with violence or chaos. It shows us we are already in it. We've just become desensitized to the smell of it. That's white modernity. That is whiteness.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. The story of Spaceship Earth is simple. We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. Like a spaceship, we have a finite amount of supplies with an intelligent operating system called nature, which keeps everything replenished as long as we all respect it and participate wisely. In this podcast, I'm in conversation with folk involved in regenerating life, shifting consciousness and reimagining how we can live more beautifully and peacefully. I talk with artists, writers, activists, designers, adventurers, healers, farmers, creative mavericks, and more. Their stories invite us to participate in the co-creation of life-sustaining cultures, in service to life, becoming crew on Spaceship Earth. Greetings, Earthling. Welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast. This is Dan, your host and creator of this podcast experiment. Thank you for tuning in. It's much appreciated. If you're new here, welcome aboard. This is a podcast where we have deep, open, emergent conversations about the unravelling context we find ourselves in right now on Spaceship Earth, with humans who are upholding this spirit we call becoming crew, letting go of the passive separation passenger story and stepping into service in a more participative, relational story with life on this great big ecological, biological, mythological spaceship Earth that we call home, where we explore how we might let go of these exhausted ways of seeing, being and relating to this Earth, to ourselves and to each other, ways that have become so destructive and divisive, pitting humans and more than human life against each other, and inviting us to step fully into the invitation to evolve ourselves together in ways that put connection, cooperation, care and our entanglement with all that is alive at the centre. To encourage new ways of participation, of channeling our creativity, community and experimentation with humility and courage, compassion and mystery. And boy, are we being called to step into the mystery right now. And in mysterious times, I can think of no better human to help us consider other ways of seeing and thinking about this moment than Bayo Akomolafe, our guest in this episode. Bayo is a philosopher, writer, post-activist, professor of psychology and executive director of the Emergence Network. I hosted Bayo back in episode 66. And this episode was a live conversation recorded at the beginning of the summer here in the UK as he joined us for a second year as a guest teacher on one of our Becoming Crew Unlearning events. Bayo, I believe, is without doubt one of the most important thinkers, writers and speakers of our time, and one of the most humble, kind and funny humans with it. That's the rarest of combinations. He's such a precious human, and we're so grateful for everything he offers and brings and gives. Bayo helps us to see things and notice things differently. Things which can often feel invisible to many of us, and yet might well be the critical noticings for finding ways out of the stuckness that we're in, if we're prepared to venture into the cracks, as he might say. We had invited Bayo to come to this conversation specifically to help us better understand the terrain of whiteness. Now, if you're not familiar with this term, we're not speaking here as whiteness as skin colour, but perhaps as the invisible logic of the systems and structures and deeply ingrained ways of daily performance we all play out, enmeshed in the pervasive story of capitalist modernity here on Earth. Is it whiteness that desensitizes us to what we no longer appear to see or feel with the violence of these times, as Bayo suggests here? Bayo had written previously, "Whiteness is the logic of capture. It works alongside neoliberal humanism and alongside capitalist modes of extraction, perpetuating itself via a neurotypicality, a system of value that measures out what it means to be properly embodied, what it means to be a self, and by extension, what it means to be dispensable." This is a conversation that, in my view, offers us so much important provocation and insight to sit with in this moment. This was a live online conversation with our Becoming Crew community and includes some beautiful questions from some of them, which Bayo responds to at the end. I really hope you appreciate this episode. There's so much in here. And if you do, please consider sharing with a friend, sharing on your socials, leaving us comments, drop us an email, give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast provider. And if you can, consider flipping to a paid subscription on Substack. We're an ad-free, self-funded project, and we really need more financial support from our community to keep bringing these stories, conversations, ideas, gatherings, projects into the world. So sign up at becomingcrew.substack.com. You'll get every episode to your inbox, regular writing and news of our gatherings and events. That is all free, but you can offer a monthly subscription to support the project ongoing. We'd be most grateful for whatever you can give. And also, yes, stay to the end of this episode if you can, because featuring a new song from artist Natalie Fee. So yeah, stay tuned to the end. This is the Spaceship Earth podcast in conversation with Bayo Akomolafe. Enjoy.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you, brother. How you doing?
I'm all right. We're all right. I think
Hello, everybody.
Where I am, it's just been raining incessantly. I think we're going to, everyone's talking about zombie takeover. I think it's going to be slug takeover. They're everywhere. Good to see. Thank you, Bayo, for joining us tonight. It was pretty much a year ago, I think, when you joined us on the start of the journey we were making last year into stories and the separation story. And we were on this mission with a very different. I think some of that community are here tonight, but a whole bunch of beautiful new humans joining us tonight. But we were on that start of a journey about 3 months to digging into this separation narrative, trying to get into it at a relational level and really exploring how a lot of these stories were kind of trapping us, but also starting to see how they were kind of root ideologies of colonialism and white supremacy. And you joined us as we departed on that journey, if you remember, and we
Yes.
spoke a lot about stuckness that night, of the sort of stuckness of capitalist modernity cultures this time. And you left us, I remember well, with this invitation to shapeshift. And
has anyone done that yet? Anyone here shapeshifters?
Exactly. I think there's a bit of that that's been going on. But I guess, actually so much has happened in this year that's gone by. So a little bit, bit of context. It's like, but in many ways, it feels that this kind of that stuckness is of this dominant culture is becoming in some ways more, it feels to us anyway, more extreme, more acute, ossifying almost as things become sort of more divisive, more violent. But the reveal is accelerating as well. The cracks, as you would say, seem to be kind of accelerating. And we sort of, I guess, have come to this session tonight seeing that these kind of ideologies, these ways of seeing and thinking, we've sort of inherited in the imaginations of our ancestors, and they've rooted so deeply in our thinking. And we're really interested in how do we become kind of good students of our culture in these times and the context that we're in, so that we can understand how we've arrived here, or at least in some ways we might start to understand the logic maybe that got the dominant culture here, so that we can notice, become more aware of how these are playing out, not just around us, but in us, through us, how these ways of this logic is alive. And so we can unlearn and move into a different way of becoming. And so it's led us to this domain of whiteness, which is what we really wanted to explore tonight with you. It's something that you have written and spoken about for many years, and many others as well. And I think, I have a sense that you're gesturing towards a sort of capture of our logic almost. And so I guess just setting up the focus of this session with you, Bayo, we were thinking, here we are in 2024, the world that we've worlded, or that capitalism has worlded, or whatever we want to say, this world is unraveling very fast, from accelerating climate breakdown to the march of unquestioned AI to the violent genocide devastation we're witnessing in Gaza, and the devastation that's going on in the Congo and Sudan and many other places. It feels like this terrain of whiteness and white stability is really fracturing. And I guess we wanted to explore that tonight with you. And I guess this is a big topic. And in this moment, how is this idea of whiteness, how is it playing out? And perhaps it's capturing, I guess we're interested in not just the sort of violence that sits underneath the logic, but also maybe it's an inhibitor of becomingness, of, you talk of fugitivity and escape, but maybe this logic is not only kind of violent in its way of seeing and shaping, but also maybe it's holding us back from being able to step into new things, to different types of relations. And so I guess that was the ground for tonight, whether you could help us understand that terrain of whiteness that you speak of, and how it's most acutely kind of manifesting or showing up in this moment, because obviously it's a huge topic.
Okay, all right, brother. It's good to be here, and I'm so touched by the invitation to return. Yeah, exactly. Small invitation. Dan just said, so here's this multiverse. Let's start from there. Let's just start from there. Well, these past few weeks, months, really, I've been writing my new book, It's called An Ocean of Milk. And I'm sort of a professional dilettante. I'm exploring topics that I usually would not, to tell the truth, I would do it, whether or not I'm writing a book. But topics like private military contractors on the African continent, to difference and combination tones and this psychoacoustic phenomenon in our ears when we hear a third sound, just a ragtag group of very queer figures have been occurring to me. But I've also been learning about Brownian fields, right? And this idea of, it's a very Deleuzian concept, bodies without organs, right? And I'm not going to get into that now, except to say that it's often lost on us as a people that we're indebted to larger fields of mattering that are not always available to our senses, right? This is why I speak about the intrusive gift of the monster, right? And I'm going to use the account of the monster to speak about territories. This is where whiteness figures. Territories, a sensorium, the clearing, the coloniality of a clearing, and why I think transformation will not ride on the backs of archetypes like the hero, right? Why this feels like the time of the trickster, right? And why in these political moments, because if the things I say occur to you as some highfalutin philosophical stuff, then please know that I speak with the urgency of the realization that to speak now is to be deeply aware that we are surrounded by death and genocide and suffering and pain. That we are in a time, for instance, in 2024, this year, where half of the globe is going to the polls and the other half is wondering why. And all of us seem to be wondering about choice. Right? I'm here in the United States right now, Massachusetts, at the Schumacher Center for a New Economics, where I'm W.E.B. Du Bois Scholar in Residence. That's the fella behind me right there. And the United States is going to the polls in November, right? And they have beautiful choices. Two mainly marvelous choices, right? Between Pepsi and Coke. Those are the choices. It doesn't feel like a choice now, given the events in the world at large. It feels choice is broken, or choice is misbehaving. Choice is supposed to be this thing, this theological property that differentiates between outcomes, but it doesn't seem to be doing that right now. It seems we're in a horseshoe kind of reality. This is what a sister described it as recently, where choices are the same phenomenon, but I digress. So I want to speak about briefly this idea of this erotic field we're given to, Dan, right? That we are swimming in sensorial fields that materialize how we become embodied in the world. A quick question to everyone. Okay, I was going to skip this question, but I find, why am I skipping this question? None of you are ladies and gentlemen, I hope. I hope you're all as densely human as I am. So I hope you'd forgive my rudeness, or I hope you would embrace it and see it as a call and permission to be largely yourself. I speak about farting as feminism these days. Some of you are smiling. I know the phenomenon. I know what that is. And I was telling some of my friends recently about being in a room and someone farts and you squeeze your nose because it's a horrible smell. But over time, I may not be speaking for all of you here. Some of you might give out flagrant, secretions. But over time, the you become territorialized in the smell, and you cannot smell it any longer until someone comes in and says, "What's that stinking? I didn't need to use the fart for this, but I wanted to go in there." Right? What's that smell that's in the air? Psychologists have a term for this. They call it desensitization. Right? It's that over time, odorous smells will disappear if you're in the situation of its territorialization. I feel, in a sense, that the world is speaking to us by proliferating, desensitizing monstrosities. We rudely call them cracks or climate chaos or pandemics. But the world is discommunicating. There's this planetary consciousness, this idea that the planet is also speaking. It's not speaking to us as if we're outside of it. In many senses, it's speaking with itself, right? Because we are not on the planet, we are the planet in its ongoing complexity. So the planet is disseminating these monstrous tensions, and they arrive to us as violent disruptions of the normative, or the normal, or the familiar. And then we point our fingers at them and say, "That's violent," right? We know in our stories the monster as the harbinger of violence. I want to disrupt that and think instead that monsters, the monster or the monstrous here, I'm not parsing. In my work, I parse between the two, but I won't do that here. The monster is the thing that shows up and introduces us to the violence we're already in, right? It doesn't come with violence or chaos. It shows us we are already in it. We've just become desensitized to the smell of it. That's white modernity. That is whiteness. Whiteness is not, I think it would be a mistake to reduce it to white identified people. Again, there's a tendency within the city, within the ways we're habituated into thinking about bodies, to reduce fields into molecules, to reduce intergenerational matters into individuals. It is a very, very modernizing tendency. It's very reductionistic to look at Dan, to look at Kamara and say, Kamara is all of these things and it's right there within you. We kind of situate it inside the body, inside the person. This is how we allocate agency. This is how we also neutralize intelligence in the world around us, right? So white modernity is not about white people. Whiteness was also the capture of white people. Instead, I think about whiteness and neurotypicality together, right? By neurotypicality, I'm not speaking about a type of brain. I'm not speaking about a brain type. I'm speaking about a tendency, brother, my siblings here. I'm speaking about a tendency to be produced in a certain way. The slave plantations in the antebellum South here in the United States produced slaves. They produced certain kinds of bodies that were subservient to economic imperatives, right? Those bodies that stayed true to the dynamics of the cotton plantation, those dynamics that stayed true to that tendency to produce were good bodies. The bodies that sought freedom, that wanted to escape the imperatives, the logic, the labor of the plantation were pathologized. There was actually a psychological category called drapetomania for bodies that imagined freedom. So if you were like, damn, I don't want to go to work this morning, I'm going to escape, right? There was a term for that. It was drapetomania, if you have feelings or sensations of freedom. White modernity is the cohabitation, the clearing, the co-option, the captivity of bodies in neurotypical spaces of productivity. Even the ways that we perform activism, the ways that we think about solutions, the ways that we think about solidarity could be a form of white extension. Why am I thinking whiteness here? Because whiteness, took off in the United States as an economic imperative, as a racializing imperative. This imperative seems to be jiving and vibing and waltzing with a larger civilizing ethic. That's why we think about white modernity. A good way to think about it is the neurotypical, right? It's all the ways all of us here are trained to be good bodies, right? It's all the ways we are coached to be successful people. All the times you look in the mirror in the morning and you tell yourself, you can make it. Something like that, you remind yourself that you can do it. You tell yourself, let's go. All those times you pump you're applying for a job, and then this whispering voice, this lurking ghost, this herd of holy ghosts, it's a phrase a brother used recently, tells you to pump the hand that is shaking you 3 times to convey confidence. All the ways that we're properly manicured into maintaining a certain ritual of the familiar. This is the neurotypical. And it is whiteness, right? So whiteness is a territory of acting. We are not bodies within whiteness. We are tendencies deterritorializing or territorializing whiteness. We are not isolated individuals. We are processes. It's very difficult to understand this because most of us see ourselves as isolated, separate, and separable. But instead, think it is very important, especially now, to notice that you are not separate from the smells in the room, that you are not in traffic, you are traffic. Right? It's not that you are inside traffic. You are the traffic. We are traffic. We are cartographies. We are choreographies. We are ecologies. Our bodies are not neatly and conveniently isolated into rooms or categories or identities or boxes. We are spread out. We are local, but we're also diasporic. So this is my way of starting to think about whiteness as a territory, as a performance, as a co-performance. Even blackness. Here we go. Even blackness. And I try to distinguish between blackness with a big B and blackness with a small b. Even blackness in its counter insurgency against whiteness could be a form of whiteness. I said this some years ago, maybe 3 years ago, at a concert called together by a dear brother, Pharrell Williams. And I just told someone that story right about a while ago before I joined this one. And I got up on stage and I said to a predominantly black crowd that black excellence could still be a form of white capture. All the ways we're coached to show up, all the ways we are taught that power exists in the world, all the ways we're taught to have and clamor for a seat at the table, as if this table is the only exemplification of power. This is whiteness. How to break out of it? That's another story. But I suspect you're about to lay that Marvel Cinematic Universe on my head, Dan, so let's go.
There are 2 stories on Spaceship Earth, a passenger story and a crew story. The passenger story is based on extraction, transaction, and distraction, and it's leading us towards collapse. The crew story is based on connection, cooperation, and participation. It leads towards regeneration.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Amazing. Thank you, Bayo. I see you talking about desensitizing, and I've been thinking a bit about numbness as well, like a sort of numbness that seem to be experiencing in the culture of what is happening. And I'm interested in, you talk about that neurotypical, that sort of capturing of the logic, and I'm wondering whether, how to escape from that kind of captured logic requires an aliveness, a kind of opening up, a feeling. If the this terrain is desensitizing, if that's part, if it's almost, numbing people's our ability to sort of respond in different ways. So I guess I'm just interested in like that breaking out of the capture, breaking out of that, to me requires this feeling. And you spoke a lot about, in fact, I was on one of your sessions recently around grief. And I sort of sense as well that kind of grieving is, whiteness doesn't do grief, is my sense. It's not very, it finds it very hard to sort of, step into, the kind of the unpredictability, the creativity of grief, the kind of like and so I'm sort of like really curious about this feeling, this how to sort of break out of this desensitize. And I'm interested in grief as a kind of potentially as a portal or a way out of this captured logic. So I don't know.
I mean, the fifth edition of the APA DSM Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, which is the Bible for people who are like me, clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, recovering psychologists, classifies grief pathologically. Whiteness does grief, actually, but it does grief as a pit stop, right? It's a pause to get back to productivity.
Right.
That's why if you're grieving for more than a year, I mean, it's long-term grief, then there's something wrong with you, right? There's something wrong with you. There's something to be addressed here. No one should grieve that long, according to this diagnostic manual, right? And there's a whole lot of conversation to be had about diagnostic criteria. But whiteness treats grief as in the way, right? Or it imagines grief as instrumental to the civilizational project of marching in this death spiral that we conveniently call progress. And that is what is alive for me when I hear you speak about the creativity of grief. That is such a beautiful articulation of what I would also think of as grief's fugitivity, right? That there is a sense in which we can break away from the racetrack, but this is not individual work. Again, this is how I want to speak about the larger issues. So let me take a few moments to speak about how breaks, why I think and speak about breaks, okay? I've been saying it for some time, that I'm wary about doors and doorways. Not that I find them horrific or something, but doors are anticipated gestures within architectural spaces. They're already there, right? They're built in by the architect. The architect takes pains to imagine how people move through spaces, right? And builds doors and doorways to facilitate that. So doors enact exits and access. Doors allow us to move through the logic of fields and spaces. And that's why I'm wary about them, because they only tend towards the familiar. And that's why I'm wary about techno-bureaucratic solutionism, because it seems like it tries to put a handle on everything, right? To treat every moment as a door, right? Climate collapse, put a handle on it, right? It's our way of extending the coloniality of human mastery. There's something troublingly anthropocentric about wanting to put a handle on everything. Even the idea, which not too long ago I subscribed to, feels suspiciously anthropocentric to me. This idea that there is a single syndrome that informs all the symptomatic outbursts of all the problems we're finding in the world. That if only we can address that singular underlying thing, we call it separation, or we can call it original sin, or we could call it Phil Collins. I don't know. You can call it anything, whatever. It's, if we can address that singular thing, then we've addressed all our problems. There's something big human centric about them, but I digress. Doors are facilitate inclusion and exclusions, but they are part of the logic of a terrain, of an architecture. What an architect cannot, however, anticipate, brother, are cracks. No one builds cracks. I don't know of any architect that's like, oh, that crack, yep, I anticipated it. It's right there. The cracks are the excess of design. They are para-design. They are almost para-theological. When you create, you design worlds, but cracks speak about hidden tensions, hidden fields that travel alongside the claims to colonial stability. So that is one way of figuring this other conversation, that in every settlement, there are hidden tensions. We do our darndest to cover them up, right? In Brazil, when it was still an empire, I think it was Dom Pedro, the emperor, wanted to build a post-racial society, right? And he's considered one of the greatest leaders of Brazil before he was sent on exile. Dom Pedro wanted to impress the person he was getting married to, and so built this or refurbished this this region in Rio de Janeiro called Cais do Valongo, refurbished it and built a monument there, in an effort to build this almost utopian post-racial society. But he did it by building atop the bones of slaves and people that had died before. This was known again, and it erupted again in the year 2000. Who here is a soccer fan? I can't believe I said soccer. I have to take that. I'm so sorry to people who watch football. I apologize deeply. It is football. Become an American. Football. Brazil hosted the World Cup. The Football World Cup, the FIFA World Cup. And something happened. They started to, dig out the landscape, and then they unearthed these bones. And it was such a powerful spiritual moment, especially for the people of African descent over there, to come to the bones of their ancestors and notice that something else was troubling beyond notions of justice or notions of arrival or notions of utopia or notions of development, that there was something traveling alongside Brazil's claims to supremacy. And that is what I want to talk about here, that in every settlement, there are hidden tensions. These tensions often erupt in forms of cracks or the monstrous. I think these tensions are decolonial possibilities. They could come in form of grief, or they could come in form of viruses and microbes. They could come in form of autistic meanderings. They find ways to disappoint our claims to arrival. They could come in form of the para-representational, the thing that doesn't fit neatly into our senses of knowledge or what is good or bad. I am saying right now, especially writing in my book, that the monstrous, this tendency, is coming in form of what I call syncopation. It's coming in form of notions of depression, of not feeling satisfied or well hosted within white modernity. It's like at some level we are grieving being human in this system. We just don't know how to cry out. We don't know how to sit with it, right? We go to a therapist and then we put you back on the road. We tell you, get back, be a good citizen. That's what the flatness proliferates, good citizens. And yet, even with activism, sorry, I'm dancing from here to there. We're in such a time, brother, that solidarity itself seems to be misbehaving, right? I've been speaking about how our waxing poetic about the need for sustainability under the pretense of saving the planet actually performs a waste colonialism that damages countries and communities in the so-called global south. That 90% of waste, materials sent to, more than 90% sent to recycling plants actually goes to South America, to India, to Asia, to Vietnam, to Nigeria, to the Gambia. That, and I said this some time ago, that 15 million pieces of clothing sent by the fashion industry, conscientious, good, well-intentioned folks working in the fashion world in the global north, goes to Ghana and becomes a cottage industry of waste. They call it the dead white man's clothing in Ghana. 15 million pieces of discarded clothing, fabric, material, right? It goes to Ghana and they call it the dead white man's clothing. This isn't pejorative. This is a comedic way of saying the white man who wore these dresses is dead. So you can buy it. And people pick it up on the roadside. 70% of that actually is illegally discarded. This happens under the beautiful headline of sustainability. So what happens when the choices that we can make to be good actually proliferates the harm we're trying to avoid? Then we're in a unique place. It's a different place. I think my work is about sensitizing people to the openings, to the cracks, not as a solution, not as a guarantee, but because the absurdities of these times call for a responsibility, a cultivating of different kinds of responsibilities and different kinds of sensorial awarenesses that might allow us to be capable of responding to these moments, not to fix it, but to be called into its different logic, right? And I'm not speaking about alternatives here, brother. I'm not speaking about, oh, we're doing this, let's do this other thing. Because even alternatives can serve the infrastructure of the familiar, right? So this is my way of saying, in a nutshell, and I don't really like nutshells, but this is my way of saying that we can be assiduously opposed to certain realities and still be part of their functioning. And that is how terrains become intelligent. That is why we need to be drawn to the hidden tendencies, the cracks, the breaks, the openings. My sister Erin Manning said it this way recently in a podcast. She said that to be opposed to something, to be anti this and anti that, risks repeating the logic that we're opposed to. And it also risks obscuring and missing out of the openings, the spillages, the leakages that occur, that allow us to be transformed. Transformation has never been a human project. It is more than human. And it is very scandalous and controversial to modern citizens to assert that, because we're trained to believe we are the valedictorians of choice. We own choice. We can change things if we want to. All we need is data and philanthropic resources. All we need is political readings and more conferences. But it seems we're stuck, brother. And that is how I theorize cracks as post-humanist, more than human ecological openings in the sensoria that incarcerate us.
It's making me think a bit about the weather, as how the weather might be one of these cracks, because it's something I notice a lot here in the UK. You know, people again sort of say, "Oh, bloody weather! It was our holiday, and it was raining, and it's sort of this kind of sense of like, somehow the weather is not functioning in the way that it should for my enjoyment right now. I'm on holiday, for God's sake, and it's like we're camping, and it's just been anyway. But there's something with this. You talk about these inconvenient, these things that can that can disrupt these patterns. And I sense, because the weather is changing so dramatically, I don't know what, I'm speaking for my own, and it is so unpredictable, and that's only going to get, that's going to accelerate more and more. But maybe that's something that actually can disrupt this logic, that because we're moving into space where we can't, like you say, like we can adopt another way of dominating, another way of trying, but actually maybe it's this, the Earth is responding in ways that are so unpredictable, and the frequency of these unpredictable is shifting. So it's in many ways inviting us into so much. It's stepping into this sense of unknowingness, which. So I wonder that. I wonder whether the the breaking down of this predictability in our weather systems is possibly something which has the potential to liberate this kind of captured logic in some ways, because we're going to go mad with it.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what's required.
I think so. That there's a proverb: those who the gods love, they first make mad. So maybe there's something about being beside ourselves that invites us. And I'm seeing a term in the chat here that really what we're speaking about is about other materialities of care. Like, as white modernity hollows out, bodies are grappling for handles and, spaces in the dark to hold onto a sense of, confidence or certitude. That's how we navigate the world. It's like we've lost our pheromone trail. And so we're going around in circles and we're trying to hold on to something. And then we tell ourselves through motivational speakers that we need to keep on doing what we're doing. Just persist in doing it. Just keep on doing it, and summarily we'll arrive home. But that's how ants die in death spirals, right? So yes, in a sense, you might say that the weather is cracking open, that maybe we should even go further to say the weather has never been outside our doors, that we are weathering bodies as well. And this means we are asystemic. This is also my gripe with, systems theory. Systems theory is, also kind of, it's useful, but it doesn't know how to hold space for the useless, right? And the useless, the not yet legible, the not yet available is part of how the world embodies itself, right? But systems theory, and when we tell ourselves, oh, this is network to this, and this is network to that, and a butterfly's wing in Beijing will affect the river in London, it feels like an impressive thing to say. Yes, it is. However, it still leaves us in a place as if we are outside, just connecting the webs together, as if we're in a transcendent position and saying, look at the web of life. Oh, we have this very vast view of things. And there's a tendency to remove us from these webs of mattering. To resituate us here is to notice that we are also part of an asystemic universe that is troublingly beyond legibility, and that will not always lend itself to our processes of rendering the world intelligible for our instrumental uses. And that is what we have to learn to live with uncertainty, with loss, with grief. There's something about staying with the weather gone awry, that cultivates what I call generative incapacitation. That the places of repair have to look like impairment. The places of transformation will not look like healing in the ways that we think about it. They'll look like the interruption or the intervention of a Yoruba shaman when he approaches his client with a knife. And that might seem terrifying to people who are trained outside of these cosmological spaces. But something about the body is already comorbid and complicit in the proliferation of weather patterns. Something about how we show up as individuals, how we eat, how we make love, how we reproduce, how we drink water, how we name names, how we treat the world is weather patterns. So it's not about us fixing climate collapse. You know, the language of fixing that is really, really troubling to me. It's not about fixing the world outside. It's about coming into a space of humility and allowing ourselves to meet, or in the words of Rilke, to be defeated over and over again. I have a beautiful way to think about this materiality of care that I'm speaking about and what a crack might look like. Has anyone here watched the movie The Truman Show? The Truman Show. Everyone. So, spoiler alert. It's Jim Carrey, and he's the unwitting subject of a grand reality television show that feels like an apt metaphor for civilization, right? And everything is fine with him until things start to go wrong. Maybe something that looked like a star to him turns out to be some studio light in this giant dome. Right. I'm not going to give the premise of it. I'll invite you to go watch the movie if you haven't watched it before. But things start to break. Things start to fall. And this becomes the rippling crack in the dome that allows Jim Carrey's character, Truman, to embark on fugitive exile. Right. There's a moment in the movie when he turns and his gaze meets the gaze of a lady who is to him just a stranger in his world, but is actually, a background actor. And something sparks between them, the minor gesture. And this ignites an entirely different cartography that leads Jim Carrey's character, Truman, to a giant crack where he's met by the voice of God. And God says, I knew you when you were born. I saw you when you first took steps to go to school. I know everything there is to know about you. There's nothing outside of this realm for you. Stay right here where we know you. He's actually saying stay in the plantation so we can continue to use your body to produce billions of dollars for our purposes. To stay here where it's productive. And then he says something that is so theologically significant to me. He says, I offer you life and death. Right? And Jim Carrey's character bows down and says, if I don't see you, good morning, good evening, and good night, and walks out. I think that is the vocation of post-activism, that life and death isn't working any longer. Life and death isn't working. Solidarity, you want to save the planet? Oh my goodness. Come to the global south and learn how your saving the planet is actually damning it even further. I don't mean to be alarmist or isolationist. I don't mean to speak in universalizing tones or binaries as to suggest that there aren't well-intentioned, beautiful productions and explorations and even solutions. However, the larger tendency seems to be that these systems repeat themselves, even when we think that you're doing something unique and differentiating. Like justice, the whole concept of justice is being called into question right now with the ICC. And a dear sister of mine just sent me a news report. The ICC actually, in its history, it has condemned more Africans than people of the global north. And it seems justice and criminal courts are set up for the global south, not for anyone in the global north. Justice itself is seemingly suspect now. Where do we go when there isn't any highway any longer? That is the question I want to sit with.
We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that? You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
If you'd like to support the running of the Spaceship Earth podcast, head over to our Substack and sign up. You'll get every episode straight to your inbox, weekly writing, plus other crew offerings. We're grateful for whatever you can give. Join us at becomingcrew.substack.com.
Amazing. I think we should. I guess there's a lot coming out. I want to probably invite our community to do a little bit of reflection, to bring up some thoughts and noticings to throw back at you, Bayo. But I am left. I am left slightly with this sense of bringing it back to this capture, if you like, of whiteness, and this sort of sense of courage that's requiring all of us, as at least how I see it, to really learn to trust ourselves in different ways, because I see so much has been kind of outsourced, almost obedience, outsourcing of kind of logic in some ways. And so this need to really find our unique, our own ways of navigating, which is, I think that's the invitation. And I can only speak for what I witness in the culture I'm in, but that's quite counter how we've been programmed. So this sense of moving into our bodies, learning to open up to this wider intelligence that's all around us, and building this capacity for courage with others. Like you say, it's not something we can do alone. To trust ourselves, to shift away from this neurotypicality to this diversity of becoming, of relating, of being. And so, yeah, I'm just sort of left with that kind of, it's kind of collective, but in some ways very personal, I think, that's being.
Brother, the personal is collective.
Yes,
right. The personal is already civilizational, is already political, is already gastronomical, is already microbial. The personal has never been divorced from these larger flows, right? So there's no like personal work of transformation, or you're on a personal work to become, saved or something. There's no easy way in an entangled and entangling universe to delineate between the personal and the political. And that means, in a sense, courage is not even human. Courage is a post-humanist thing. It's a gift. It's like the wind blowing in our sails, and we can harness it and share it and infect others with it. And maybe that will look like making sanctuary, like this political project and activation by the cracks is this geophilosophy of staying with the tensions without rehabilitating them, right? The world proliferates the monstrous as instigations of transformation, but we've gotten very good at putting a suit on a monster and calling that the politics of inclusion. And while we need a politics of inclusion, we risk obscuring transformative moments.
Eva, would you like to give us a little reflection brief for some emerging questions?
Sounds good. Yeah, I think before we obediently start to shoot questions into the chat for Bayo to extract more wisdom and insights and interesting bits, the invitation is to take next 5 minutes or so to be with what you've just received, what you've just noticed in this gathering. And that could be through journaling or sketching or just sitting, and just, or moving, whatever it is that you need to do to. And of course, it's not to let's process what just happened, but let's offer a pause to notice what's happening for us. And by the end of that time, maybe there is a question that is coming up that you'd love to put to the community, share with the community. Maybe it's a poem, maybe it's a song, maybe it's something else I can't even imagine. But the invitation is to take the next few minutes. We'll play some music and just be with what you've received. And then we will open it up to questions, noticings, offerings. That's the invitation. The floor is now open. James, please go ahead.
Oh, hi. Thanks so much. I just really struck by the line around this is not the time for heroes. This is the time for tricksters. And I'd just be really interested to hear more about how individuals or organizations can embody the trickster in this time.
Thank you, brothers. I was at Sintra in Portugal last year, and I was speaking about failure. It was a business-like conference, beautiful. Love the organizers of this. They're my siblings. And I was speaking on panel interviewed by a captain of industry. Is that the right phrasing? A captain of industry, right? And I spoke about failure, and he said, yeah, I know that, fail forward. And I said, nope. I'm talking about fail forward. If you can fail into already anticipated spaces, then that ain't failure. So when I speak about a trickster today, I'm speaking about all the ways that our logics of continuity are being disrupted by things we cannot quite hold. They're peripheral. They resist or refuse articulation. The hero is geared up to kill the monster. At least that's the Campbellian idea, right? The hero travels underground and kills the monster. I've always wondered about the monster and the life of the monster, the hidden careers of the monster. Does the monster have anything to say at all about emergence, right? There's a time for killing monsters, I believe. I mean, Theseus famously killed the Minotaur on his rampage towards Athens. And his rampage made room for democracy. Democracy is founded on the genocide of monsters, even fabled ones, right? But there is a time when we must travel to the edges, when we must go to the edges because settlement isn't working any longer. And that's where we are now. We cannot risk victory, right? We cannot risk the hero's sword. We cannot risk winning over climate change or climate chaos, because survival would be like the slave ship fixing a hole in its hull. Right? We cannot risk planting solar panels on a slave ship. We have to travel differently. The Yoruba people say, in order to find your way, you must become lost. So to organizations and communities and collectives that are exploring what that means, I would say that it might look like making room for the failure of the monster, making room for that gift, organizing around the vulnerability that this time calls for, sharing with each other in vulnerability and in intimacy and in trust, and then tracing. This work that I call Until Fugitivity is about tracing our imbrications within paradigms of harm and suffering, and also tracing the openings that are available to us as a result. But this is a larger conversation. There isn't a single thing to do. There are ecologies of practices to do. Whatever is called for at this moment will look local and will be deeply grounded in the intelligence of where you are. That's one way I want to respond to that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for everything. I've written like bits and pieces all over my page, and when I look at it later, I'm going to think I had a stroke, probably. But I'm going to attempt to articulate this question.
Uh-huh.
I really love what you said about whiteness as a territory, that we live inside it. And it makes me think about like times that I go out alone into the forest. I'm not white anymore, maybe aside from the Patagonia I'm wearing. But I'm just an animal in the forest when I'm out there alone. And I feel like I can bring bits of that back with me when I come back to, real life, if you will.
Yeah.
But then I have to step back into kind of everything that's happening.
Yes.
And it just makes me wonder, do you already see a territory outside of whiteness that exists in the reality we are living in? Or is it something that we are moving towards but doesn't exist yet? And I ask this because I think like of Vanessa Machado de Oliveira in Hospicing the Journey talks about how even the people in the global south are, like you said, we can be opposed to the realities, but still part of them, right? I think even people who didn't contribute to causing all the problems are part of it. So I'm wondering is there already another territory, or is it like something we have to build? Well, build. I hate that word, but I guess you know what I mean.
I hear you, sister. I hear you. I think that is important to say and to repeat that whiteness is a performance. That doesn't mean when people hear that, they immediately link it from reality. They think reality is fundamentally bodies performing things. I'm saying reality is performance embodying bodies, right? That reality is processual. It is not fundamentally bodies moving through space-time. It is processes gaining territoriality or losing territoriality. So when you say that when you're in a certain mode, you're not white, that may be scandalous to social justice collectives. That may be terribly scandalous and may call for your head and cancellation and all of that. But I think it needs to be said. A dear brother of mine, Orland Bishop, said, there's a very infra-thin space, and I think I'm using his cadence now. There's a very infra-thin space between when I wake up in the morning and when I become a black man. Right? This is what Erin Manning calls autistic perception. That we perform identity. Identity is not essence. It's not domiciled in our chest. We don't carry it because our bodies are part of larger forces. Post-humanist, feminist, deterritorializations. To your question, however, I am very suspicious of if I can sense where we're going. I don't know, my creaturely habits are devoted to the non-legible, right? To the parable of the sower, Octavia Butler, the idea that we don't know where we're going, and maybe that's very emancipatory. Because if we already know where we're going, if we know what it looks like, it might be whiteness giving us another space. Just in the same way that whiteness offers DEI right now. Yes, this is not a way of saying DEI is not addressing matters of exclusion. We need to pay the bills. We need to be included. We need spaces of power. But if the only ways that we articulate power and belonging is to sit around this damn table that is burning and is on fire, is to be centralized in this modernity, then I don't want to be part of that ideation. I don't want to be part of that ritual. So, sister, there's something about not knowing where we're going that feels very, very generative to me. We might catch a glimpse here and there or anticipate how worlds and worlding moments might be through the cracks, but I think it's good advice to stay with the not knowing and to know that our work is intergenerational. We are not going to arrive summarily. There's no utopia to capture, but staying together, working together, trusting each other in our failures together while composting our claims to righteousness. Oh, that's beautiful work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. Is that okay, Bayo?
Yes.
Okay, Genevieve.
I was just going to say, I think Bayo covered my question in his last answer. So Pooja, you should ask your question.
Wow, that's great. Genevieve, thank you. I've never done that before.
Thank you. No, I really, really appreciate that. I just first of all want to say I'm so grateful to be here in this space again. I took part in Becoming Crew last year, and as a result of that, I also took part in We Will Dance with Mountains, which was such a joyful and also heartbreaking experience all at the same time. And I just want to share a little bit about my journey and then pose my question, because it does link to what you've just been talking about. And I hope I am articulate. So bear with me. Through this journey with becoming crew of We Will Dance with Mountains, I have gone through a process of undoing. I have been rocked to my ultimate core. And I have had to regurgitate parts of myself that I had thought were myself. But they were not. They were the white sensorium influencing what I thought I desired, what I thought I valued, who I thought I was in the world. And it was that undoing that created space for a new kind of becoming. And I'm still understanding what that means and what that looks like and how that feels, because it's different every single day. However, I still have to operate within the white sensorium, and like all of us do. Yeah. And I see it like a slipstream. It's very invisible. It's like water, and you sort of just get sucked into this slipstream, and then before you know it, the language, the words that are coming out of your mouth, the way that your thoughts are constructed, are all entangled in this white sensorium. And I no longer feel like I belong to them. But the words are coming out of my mouth when I step away from a meeting, and I'm like, what did I just say? Who was that person that just operated through my body? And so my question is really about, how can we make tangible this trickster reality, this minor gesture? How can I stay with it and not judge it and not be hostile towards it? Because I realized that being hostile towards it made me angry, and making me angry wasn't changing anything. I was just hurting myself even more. So I'm thinking about knowing that I have to operate within the white sensorium, and the white sensorium is not going away anytime soon. How do I stay with the grief? How can I continue to be aware of the slipstream and the tendency to just be sucked right into this slipstream? Also being aware that I'm just human, and we've inherited these values, and we've inherited this way of thinking, that they are not ours. They're not mine.
Oh, thank you, Fuja. That is a powerful question. I want to sit with that and dwell on that too. And thank you for sharing so vulnerably what needs to be broadcast in many spaces where many people are asking such questions but don't have the words for it. The first thing I would say is humbling. It took some time to come here to say these things to myself, and to hear my elders say it to me, is that it is not left to me to save the day. It's not left to us to fix the world. The aesthetic of fixing the world, of putting it in a predictable path where we can always be in right relation to it, is not possible, is not always possible. In fact, the idea of wanting that to be possible all the time is exactly how whiteness gains its form. I was speaking with someone a while ago, and she was speaking to me about the travails of owning a phone and technology. And basically she said she's going to be in right relationship with the phone, that she's practicing being in right relationship with the phone. And I couldn't hold myself any longer. And I said, sister, what if that's impossible? How do you bring yourself to say that you can be in a right relationship with your phone that is resourced by Congolese girls and boys who have to mine cobalt for the phone to function? How does that happen? How do you prefigure that? How do you make sense of that? To come to a world that is entangled is to come to the humility of recognizing that we are imbricated in webs of suffering. that the very fact that we're breathing now means we're part of the colonial project of cyanobacteria, right? That colonize the entire planet with oxygen. Where's justice for those other life forms that didn't depend on that resource? That's what it means to live within the trouble. That's what Donna Haraway is inviting, to stay with the trouble of that. How do we make that tangible? Well, the intelligence for that will come to us. This is what I think of as making sanctuary. And people often invite me to give a definition to it. But there's something mysterious that escapes the definitional that is implied in making sanctuary. For me, the logic of it is refusing to rehabilitate the monster, is staying with the cracks. That thing that you spoke about a while ago as something coming sideways and making you disrecognize yourself, there's something counter-hegemonic about that. There's something strangely emancipatory about that. If you find yourself in a position, in circumstances where there are others to share this with you, where you can cook a meal or two, or maybe where you can take your monsters out on a picnic, where you can stay with the smallness and the insignificance and yet the cosmic playfulness of what it is your body is doing with this space-time, then maybe that's all we can do. Maybe our work is long and hard and joyful. Maybe it doesn't terminate at the point where we lose our breath. Maybe our death is also activist, is also turning the soil. Maybe we sit with the open-ended teenage awkwardness of a world that is still discovering itself. And maybe that's all there is to do. Maybe that's all we can do. Maybe that's all that is asked of us. So, yes, there are no guarantees here. I do not offer any. I used to, but I ran out of the stock and I refused to purchase new ones. So we'll stay with the trouble of noticing that our work is small and we're not well put together. And there's something about the humility of that space that Fernand Deligny, the French visionary after the Second World War, noticed in his refusal to rehabilitate autistic children. There was a smallness of that moment that allowed him to pierce through the fugitive. And maybe that's what our work is, sister. So I'm asking you, sit with your failures, share them, the ways you don't rise up to the image of the modern, share them with others, call a crew together or two or three and share a meal or do something. Call it your group. Call it the Giggling Council. Call it anything you want to. Invite Phil Collins in there if you want. I don't know. He keeps on showing up everywhere I go. But somehow that immediately brings us to the edge work of our times, which is sitting with the trouble of our imbrications in a world that exceeds us and defeats us again and again.
Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bayo. Conscious of your time. I'm just reminded, actually, as you were having that dialogue with Pooja about an email you sent myself and your cohort on your Dance with Mountains 2015, which was, the title was "May Your Road Be Rough." I'm sort of, that's just come up.
May your road be rough. Yes, it's a prayer. It's a curse too, but it's good.
Bayo, just sort to say thank you so much for joining us, and it's been a beautiful space to have with you, and we just massive gratitude as ever for what you offer and what you give in these times, and hopefully you'll come back again. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. From myself and Phil Collins, it's goodbye.
Thank you, Bayo. Thank you, Phil Collins. Thank you, our wonderful community who participated in that amazing gathering. I hope you received. There's a lot in that. I think that's really, really vital fertilizer to sit with in these times. So if you do receive, please consider sharing with someone else who might appreciate. Post us on your socials so others might find us. Give us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast provider. That's really helpful. I know it sounds weird and stuff, but when you're an independent podcast with no ads and you're self-funded, these things help more people find us. So it will take you about a minute. We'd really appreciate that. Or drop us a comment on the Substack or on the Instagram, or drop us a mail. We'd love to hear what this conversation brings up for you. And subscribe if you haven't on the Substack, becomingcrew.substack.com. That would be most appreciated. So I'm going to play out with a song, and this is a new song from a new artist, Natalie Fee, and the song is called Winter, which is quite apt as we're moving into winter. Now, Nat is pretty extraordinary human. She's actually came on the podcast in 2020, episode 26, 4 years ago, and she, at that point, was an award-winning campaigner, activist, author, speaker. She's a proper maverick, Nat. She makes all kinds of extraordinary impacts. Then through creative campaigning, through an organisation she set up called City to Sea, which is really trying to bring our attention to the plastic pollution in our consumerist culture, and also encouraging the kind of spirit of refill. Nat was like one of the leading campaigners in shifting us looking towards a refill culture. But she's a brilliant creative. She's a writer, she writes poems, and she's a musician. And over the last couple of years, she's been, I think, maybe, tuning more into her creativity in these times. And somewhat this year announced that she'd been working on an album. And she's just released a couple of songs. The album, I think, comes out next year. And this is the next release. It's called Winter. And I really recommend tuning in to Nat and her work. And all that she does. She's a very, very special crew member on Spaceship Earth. So thanks a lot for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Much appreciated. Really appreciate your support. Go well out there. Look after yourself and those around you, and keep entangling with this beautiful, mysterious, more than human world that we're part of. That really feels like the antidote for these times, and connecting with each other, stepping into service, becoming crew on Spaceship Earth. So, until next time, peace and out.
This podcast is created in service to life, for you. It takes time, funds and energy to make. If you'd like to contribute to the running costs, you can donate the price of a cuppa or a pint. Find the link on our website. This podcast wouldn't exist without the following crew: Charlie Shred, Audio Jedi; Seaman Home Burgess, Engine Room; Willow Burgess, Jingles.
The ground is hard and the light is low. There's a quiet in the air, an invitation to go slow. The north wind bites and the nights, they are long. A time to remember all you are and all you've done. Give in to the winter. Lay down your tools a while, rest your body by the fire. Give in to the winter. Let the stillness be your guide. Trust the coming of the light. The days draw in and the sun shines gold. The trees have dropped their leaves in surrender to the cold. And the earth, she retreats and she speaks.